Hello and welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones and we are so happy you can join us today. There's been a lot of talk about the number of dead whales and dolphins that are washing up along the New Jersey shore. Federal authorities are calling it unusual mortality events. The National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, they say there's evidence of ship strikes and fishing gear entanglement, and that appears to be the cause. But not everybody agrees. Some are concerned that deaths are related to the number of offshore wind development projects and are calling on a moratorium to get answers. Standing by is climate behavioral scientist Dr. Shweta Chakraborty. She assesses threats related to climate change, and we're going to get her take. Recently, though, I spoke with Assemblyman Alex Siewicki, who represents New Jersey's 12th legislative district. So let's get to it. There's been a lot of talk about the number of dead whales and dolphins that are washing up along the New Jersey shore. Some federal authorities are calling it unusual mortality events. The National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, say there's evidence of ship strikes and fishing gear entanglement that could be the cause, but not everyone agrees. Some are concerned that the deaths are related to a number of offshore wind development projects and are calling on a moratorium so they can get more answers. My guest right now, Assemblyman Alex Siewicki, who represents the 12th legislative districts, which takes in parts of Burlington, Middlesex, and Ocean counties. Assemblyman, it's good to see you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this, and depending on what report you leave, you can get potential causes for these whale and dolphin deaths. So what is your take?
Well, first off, I'm the newest member of the Assembly, and if you told me 6 months ago I'd be here with you today talking about whales, I would have said there's absolutely no shot in the world. I mean, we have so many bigger issues, presumably in New Jersey, that need to be addressed that this was not one that crossed my mind 6 months ago. However, I represent Ocean and Monmouth counties, and this is a big deal in Ocean and Monmouth County. It's something that my constituents have called me about. They've approached me at different events. I happen to be a lifelong resident of Ocean County, and in my lifetime, I've never seen or heard of this many whale deaths, in the time that I've been here. I'm a big beach guy, and I've never seen them.
Yeah,
and now it seems like we have a ton.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be jarring, seeing something so big washing up on the shore. Have you heard from some of your constituents? What are they saying?
Well, they're heartbroken. As I said on the Assembly floor a couple of weeks ago, I don't know a person that doesn't like whales. They're just something that I think most people really love. And the fact that nobody has been really talking about it to the extent that I think we should be was surprising to me. And again, I had no intention of being the person to speak up about it, but I did my research before I did. And what surprises me is the quotes we're hearing from others who are in support of the wind farms, which I'm not against, but calling the concerns about the whales dying as a result as disinformation, as the governor actually was quoted. The applications, the federal applications for this work, require that the builders indicate if they think there's going to be any deaths attributed to their work, specifically with whales and other marine wildlife. And so that's it. Those are stats that are in the actual applications. And for two of the applications, they're estimating 33 to 35 deaths of whales.
And so, and again, I don't know what the norm is. And certainly, in this day and age, so many people with a cell phone, they can quickly post and it gets picked up by a lot of people because people do care about animals. So how do you think that the problem at this point has to be addressed?
Well, again, if the permits indicate that the builders know they're going to potentially kill whales. And as I understand, I don't claim to be an expert in whales. I don't claim to be an expert in marine biology of any kind. But the permits themselves have two levels of what's called harassment. Level B harassment, as I understand it, is a fairly common thing. And it basically says our work will have the marine life change direction. Very simple. Level A is much more serious and less frequent. But these permits have level A harassment in them, and these builders are saying, hey, 33 to 35 wells are expected to be impacted or potentially can be impacted. When you know that going in, and now we see the results that we're seeing, and if you want to claim, well, there's no absolute proof, I wouldn't disagree with that, but we should probably take a pause and check it out
Yeah.
because it does seem like the increase is there, and it seems like you knew that going in.
Yeah, so you're not against the wind development. So can you talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that? It's just the
Yeah.
concerns about the impact, if you could discuss.
Yeah, and to be clear, neither are my constituents. They are supportive of the wind development as a secondary source of energy, of course, I'm very encouraged about the jobs that they may create. So I'm all for those projects, but it can't be at just any cost. And
Yeah.
I think the number of whales we're seeing is a concern.
What would a responsible wind power plant look like? Because people who live in that area, there's been pushback just against solar panels because they don't want to see it, which is understandable. If I have a house on the beach, I don't want to look at it either. So can you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
responsible planning?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what we're talking about. I get why these are being built offshore. Again, I'm all for it. I think it's a good idea to have alternative sources of energy, solar included. I think you can put them in places that make sense. Solar, for example, you never saw them as carports, 10, 15 years ago, and now you're seeing them as carports because it makes sense. You're covering the cars, and you're not creating an eyesore. You don't even see them, right? So that is responsible. I think we've learned over time how to do it better. I think this will long term be a great way to create an alternative source of energy. I just think since it is new and we're seeing some concerns as a result, we need to take that time to make sure we do, in fact, do this responsibly.
Yeah, as a reporter, a message as a young person that was always, hammered in is, consider the source. Where is the information coming from, and to give it perspective. So with that, and because they're, federal agencies are saying, well, they can't definitely link it. What groups are you working with? Are you working with environmental groups? Are you working with state government? Who exactly are you working with, and what type of support are you getting?
Yeah, well, I did basic research to start, and then I started meeting with others that could give me a bit better information. I looked at things like NOAA reports where they said, hey, anytime you impact the hearing of a marine mammal, you're causing them distress, you're causing them potentially not to eat, and you're potentially causing them to die. Again, this was something I didn't know of a month ago, right? But that is what I'm reading. Then I met with I met with fishermen. Yeah, we have a lot of them off of Monmouth and Ocean counties. They're telling me they're seeing more dead whales out in the water. So what we're seeing on the shores, which are already horrible, are just a fraction of what actually is out there. So, and then if you read the science, and to your point, there's a lot of different science around this. Some go as far as to say that any whale, any marine mammal within a 1 mile radius of this type of construction, which is seismic and sonar, could have as high as a 100% mortality rate. Now that's probably the extreme side. No matter what, anything that I've read on the science of this is with that kind of technology, with seismic and sonar, you're going to interfere with these creatures' way of moving around. And it's going to impact them negatively one way or another to the point that they could die.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point about those who fish for a living and how it impacts them. When you start to take a look at, what is the cause, what can be done to address it. So how do you take all of those factors in to ensure that that the wildlife is protected, but it also doesn't come at a cost for people's jobs, whether they're fishermen, whether they make their living on these wind farms or what have you. How do you strike that balance while still getting answers?
Well, interestingly enough, the fishermen were among the first to raise it to me. So they're actually concerned about it themselves. Some going so far as to say they're concerned about the impact on tourism. I happen to be on the Tourism and Gaming Committee in the Assembly, and frankly, I hadn't thought too much about that part of it. tourism, you start getting into the economics, which is important. But frankly, this all started with just raising the concerns about whales dying. But then the fishermen actually raised the concern, saying, hey, if whales are going to be dead on beaches, you're going to have a concern with tourism. People don't want to see that. It's not something people want to come to the beach and see. And ultimately, the fishermen, including commercial, who depend on tourism and people to go out on their boats, are actually concerned about that.
Assemblyman, before you know it, it's going to be the summer season. People are going to be headed down to the shore. Is there a timeline that you have in mind to address this? Can you even speak to that? I mean, do we know that is the worst behind us? Is the worst to come? Can you talk a little bit about that timeline?
Well, yeah, you make a really good point. It's getting warmer. You're going to have more people at the beach soon. And this isn't going to be a good look for New Jersey if, we bring in a bunch of tourists and they're seeing dead whales come up on the beach. I have a lot of young children myself. I don't want to be bringing them to the beach for them to see something like that. In terms of the timeline, from my perspective, the sooner the better. But I'm not overly optimistic because, frankly, I don't hear a lot of acknowledgement that there is potentially a problem. And again, this isn't something that I thought I'd be talking about a month, 2 months, 6 months ago. But it is something that is concerning to my constituents in Monmouth and Ocean County, as I think it should be. And based on what I have learned so far, I think there's enough there to say, hey, let's take a pause. Let's see if there is something linked to what's going on offshore with these wind farms. Again, I'm all for them. So it's not a partisan kind of an issue. I'm supportive of the farms. I'm supportive of the jobs that they can create. I just think we need to make sure it's not at any cost.
You do a Google search that about dead dolphins, dead whales. There are news articles that come up, but it is surprising that you don't see more legislators getting involved in this, and other groups perhaps too getting involved.
When you're not hearing anybody else talk about it, and again, it should be a bipartisan type of issue. This isn't Republican versus Democrat. It's whales.
Yeah. Just final thoughts on this and transitioning to the legislature. You're just in your first 6 months there.
First off, I appreciate you having me and bringing attention to it. My 6 months here has been primarily focused on other issues, including, of course, property tax and our children's education. But given the diversity of my district, which I represent 4 counties and 14 municipalities, we have a lot going on, and as does the state. And I'm hoping that this issue won't be an issue much longer, and we'll be sure to make sure that whales and other marine life get treated the way they need to be treated, and not dying and as a result of some of these projects that we're working on.
Well, Assemblyman, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show, and we look forward to having you back, hopefully with a good update before the summer season is upon us, with some good news.
I hope so too. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you. Joining me now is climate behavioral scientist Dr. Shweta Chakraborty. Doctor, welcome to the show. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so first let's let our audience know what it is that you do as a climate behavioral scientist.
So I translate the climate science to the public and to policymakers. The idea is we need to align human behavior and policies to the reality of the impacts of climate change. We know the planet is warming. How do we adapt to this newer, warmer planet? And how do we make sure the worser warming scenarios don't come into reality? That's my role as a climate behavioral scientist.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about what's been making a lot of headlines in New Jersey, and it's whales and dolphins that are washing up along the Jersey shore. What's your take?
Whales are critically important as part of the marine ecosystem and as a carbon sink. They actually sequester 32 tons of carbon. So we need whales. It's very problematic to see them dying at these numbers. And we need to figure out why. I completely understand and appreciate that from somebody who cares about animals, but also, as I explained, from a carbon perspective and the role that they play as part of this marine ecosystem. The reality is that there's no connection to whale deaths and offshore wind turbines. Those who are propagating that connection are embroiled in oil and gas interests. The reality is that whales have come back from being endangered. They're still endangered, but they are abundantly more prevalent than they have been. And for that reason, we're seeing an increasing number of whales die because there's just more whales out there. There's more collisions with boats. There's a lot of impacts related to the oceans warming that's affecting the food chain, that is affecting whales ultimately. And that's what's causing these whales to turn up on New Jersey coastlines. It has nothing to do with offshore wind turbines that the oil and gas industry would propagate and have publics believe.
Yeah, so what is your reaction when you hear politicians and environmental groups saying, hey, we need to put a moratorium on offshore wind. We have to at least pause and take a look?
The public is too smart for this. We've seen this before. This is the playbook that oil and gas uses. It was all about birds. If you remember, actually creating the wind turbines on land was resulting in additional bird deaths. And that was something that the oil and gas industry was using to say, look at the dangers of developing these alternative clean energy mechanisms on land because of the impact it was having on the environment, like birds. But nobody cares about birds. Nobody cares about the whales. We do as conservationists, but oil and gas really only cares about money in its own pocket. So we need to be honest here. Nobody's going to fall for this. It didn't work with the birds. It's not going to work with the whales. Ultimately, the reality is that oil and gas is worse off for the whales. What it's doing is creating sonar rays that are more problematic. It's creating oil spills that are really bad for marine ecosystems. Deepwater Horizon, we all remember, occurred 10 years ago. There's still problems that we are seeing related to that oil spill 10 years later. And so, if anything, we are going to see an improvement in marine ecosystems from a move away from deep shore drilling to offshore wind turbines.
Yeah, and in New Jersey, you know, we've had a lot of pushback for the windmills, and it's interesting to see different organizations kind of flip their side. You know, first they don't want them because they don't want to, it's an eyesore. They don't want to see them. Now they're, wait, hold on, maybe we do need them. So it really, like you said, you think it's more politics, and it really isn't about whales and dolphins.
It's not about whales and dolphins. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, agency of experts on all things marine life, has stated very clearly there's no scientific evidence linking deaths of whales to the offshore wind turbines. The United Kingdom has over 2,500 wind turbines, and they are not seeing an increase in whale deaths. And so to make that connection is really sinister. And it really is to continue business as usual for oil and gas. None of this is good, but we need energy. We don't want oil and gas. It's not good for the environment. And ideally, we wouldn't want a lot of these eyesores in the form of wind turbines either, but we want energy. And so ultimately, wind turbines and solar and other renewables are better overall than oil and gas and coal. We need to move away from dirty energy. We need to move towards clean energy, eyesore or not. It's the better option. It's the better option for human health and the environment. And it's creating 10,000 jobs in New Jersey. It's allowing us to reach the commitment that the governor has made as part of the United States Inflation Reduction Act, which is to commit to 100% renewable clean energy by 2035. This will get us there, and we have to follow that trajectory if we're going to prevent impacts of climate change that we never want to see again, like Hurricane Sandy, all too familiar to those from New Jersey.
Oh yeah, right. Well, can you talk a little bit more, go a little bit more in depth about the benefits to New Jersey for offshore wind?
The benefits to New Jersey are obviously healthier environments to live in, which means less chance of pollution from oil and gas, because offshore wind turbines are that much cleaner. And so less pollution, less oil, less risk of oil spillage. And these are things that communities in New Jersey can really benefit from. 7 million of those living in New Jersey live within 100 miles of the coastlines. And so most of the New Jersey population is benefiting from having that distance to the coast. So it's really critical that we maintain clean shores and that we have livable shores. And that is something that wind energy is going to move us towards. We're talking about more jobs. We're talking about more megawatts of clean energy that will be made available to those who need energy day to day. We all want to have energy rich lives. We just need to source it from a source that is renewable, is clean, and it doesn't have all the risk that business as usual, like oil and gas, would give us.
It's always when you see a dolphin or a whale washed up, right? It's jarring, and it's something that is going to grab news headlines for better or worse. So how would you advise consumers of news to look at that information? Because again, it's easy to grab a headline, but as a reporter, consider the source. Where's the information coming from? When this story was first breaking late winter about, hey, all of these whales and dolphins, somebody said, please check the source of who is behind what study. So how would you help guide consumers of news and information, if they do see it? Because it's upsetting to see animals washing up. And it hurts New Jersey's economy. We're a shore, so much money is made through travel and tourism at the shore.
Of course, absolutely. And that is something that I study as a behavioral scientist. Why our perceptions actually influence our perceptions of risk. Right? So the reality is, if you look at the numbers, there's less whales dying now than there were in 2017. Where were the local politicians then with their outcries around whale deaths? This was a playbook opportunity to wait for something like offshore wind turbines as a cause for these whale deaths, even though we're actually seeing less whale deaths now than we were in 2017. I believe in 2017, there were 78 whales that washed up on the shores of New Jersey. And so we're still in the single digits from when I last checked in 2023. And we're improving in understanding why it's happening. And we can improve our human behaviors and our interaction with marine life, like whales, to ensure that that doesn't happen. But the reality is, it doesn't have anything to do with the wind turbines. There's no scientific evidence for that. And so we can't, as a public, be fooled by these different emotions that arise when we see whales washing up on shore. We have to align our perceptions to the reality. We have to look at the numbers. We have to look at the statistics. And like you said, we have to look at the sources behind these stories to see what's actually motivating these headlines. We are too smart to allow our emotions and our perceptions to overtake the actual evidence and the data. And that's what I implore you as a behavioral scientist to do. Align your perceptions to the actual reality. Look at the sources, look at the data. You're too smart to be led otherwise.
And NOAA, and it isn't just an environmental group. It's not just you. NOAA has come out and said, we don't think that this is due to wind turbines. It's ships striking. It's right. Am I correct?
No, absolutely. And these are the country's leading experts that have dedicated their careers to understanding oceans, to understanding what warming temperatures are doing to the surface of the oceans and deeper levels in the oceans. We are 70% water on this planet, and we are just beginning to understand the impacts of warming oceans on marine ecosystems. And so there's a lot of research yet to be done, but all signs are pointing towards the harmful impacts of oil and gas drilling and warming oceans that is disrupting the chain of life within our oceans. And so, if anything, we will be uncovering more evidence to really explain what's happening here with the whales. But there's no evidence that points towards a relationship between offshore wind turbines and these whales washing up on New Jersey's shore. In fact, the drilling from oil and gas is much louder. That really negatively impacts whales much more than the sounds that are coming from the offshore wind turbines.
Are you concerned that, as they say, like the court of public opinion is actually going to maybe pause and say, you know what, well, let's just be safe and let's put a pause on some of this offshore wind just to double check, even though other organizations have already presented their scientific findings. Are you concerned about that risk?
I am concerned about that risk because there is that massive campaign underway to really vilify offshore wind turbines, vilify the efforts being made through the Inflation Reduction Act, even though there's so many positives for the economies around the country, especially in New Jersey. Again, 10,000 jobs being created. That's money in the pockets of those in New Jersey that are really counting on these infrastructure projects to take off and to really support the local economies. And we can't have this disinformation campaign that's being propagated by the oil and gas industries that local politicians are embroiled in to overtake the good that is coming from the federal spending that is moving us towards a transition to clean energy. I am concerned about those headlines taking over the real benefits that are entrenched in science, that are entrenched in the reality of what we are experiencing with the planet warming. But I trust in the citizens of New Jersey. I trust in the citizens of the United States to be smart, to recognize where the information is coming from, to see that this is truly a campaign that is looking for a scapegoat that is looking for a way to get out of clean energy projects and continue business as usual. It's not what's smart for this country. It's not what's smart for New Jersey. And I know New Jerseyans are smarter than that. Being from New Jersey, I'm confident that the public will err and fall correctly on the side of science.
You bring up a great point. You know, Jersey people, we're skeptical. We don't always believe the headlines right away. Consider the source, do your own research. Doctor, we thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and share some of your thoughts on this topic and your expertise as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And we thank you for joining us on New Jersey Politics. I'm Laura Jones, and we look forward to seeing you back here next time.